the e-text that Tom Oates and I use when we alternate teaching the Gen Ed survey of American journalism history is a product of sort of starting where we were. When I inherited the course from John Erickson, who had taught it for 23 years, I started teaching this in 2002. I wanted to revise the curriculum, and I wanted to take a cultural studies approach to history, which John did not take in the curriculum. So I created a readings packet, and after a few years, I realized that mostly freshmen and sophomore students weren't really engaged with that. It was basically inappropriate at a reading level for them to task them to do that. And so I was approached by a rep from Great Rivers Technologies, which is an imprint of Kindle Hunt, to do a text, and it seemed to be a good way to have an innovative platform to present this revised material. We converted the stuff that was in the packet into a text and moved from the sort of analytical rhetoric of journal articles to the format of a text. I think of this as a series of tipping points. When Tim and I talked the other day on the phone, he said, you know, your web bio doesn't say that you're an expert in e-text, and I'm not. I have done a series of things always with a view toward improving the pedagogy of the course, and so using an e-text was a venture. It was something that I thought would improve the way we presented the core material of the course. And as it turns out, moving into the tile classroom and into an increasingly digital context has been sort of one step at a time along that path. I think that's what I would say about that.
Hello. At the risk of hopefully really not wanting to offend our conference organizers, for many of you, the book is dead as a one-off today. For me, it's a way of life. This is probably the 10th symposium I've attended in the past 3 or 4 years. And I can tell you one thing, the book is not dead. The book is a continuum. We will appropriate the book. The book is adaptable. It's durable. It will do what we ask of it. What I do fear is that reading will be dead. Long-form argument reading is a skill. And many of us in this room have excelled in that skill all of our lives. But get busy, put the book down for a couple weeks, get lost in the internet, and come back to it. It's not so easy. And those are for people who are trained to do it. So that's the first thing I want to say before I get into my interaction with the book as we know it. My name is Jim McCoy. I'm the director at the University of Iowa Press. I'm not an editor, thank God. The world would be worse for if I was. We publish 40 books a year. Some are scholarly, others aimed at a general trade marketplace. We publish books of regional state interest, of national and international importance. Just yesterday, one of our books was featured on All Things Considered. In the past few weeks, we've had reviews in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Slate.com. We're National Book Award nominees. We have a developing academic list in fan studies, humanities and public life, food sustainability, how the digital arts are meeting traditional books, just to name a few. We partner with Prairie Lights Books, University of Iowa Museum of Art, Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. We derive over 15% of our revenue from digital books. University Press average right now is about 5%. Almost everything we publish goes into digital format. That is to say, we're not what you probably perceive as your father's university press. My first job related to the written word was in a bookstore when I was 24, and perhaps it was the best time I've had in my life, unpacking thousands of books, engaging with others who were just as obsessed as I was, meeting authors I idolized and who were just starting, selling books to movie stars, rock stars, and most importantly, Oprah. Such are the benefits of selling books on the Magnificent Mile. And I will say, too, we had an electronic reading station. This was 1992. From there, I worked 11 years in sales and marketing departments at the University of Chicago Press, which is generally regarded as the largest scholarly press in North America. University Press in North America. I was perhaps the first scholarly publishing rep allowed at Amazon.com, and one of the first to see the Kindle. Who would buy that, was my comment. I worked regularly with YBP, Coots, and Blackwell's as the main library liaison. I ran literally thousands of profit and loss statements for books, working with editors and production managers and publicists to make sure we were producing high-quality books that could also reach their market potential. And I learned that books are not about words, they're about numbers. We created a system of sales analytics, which has since become the envy of anyone who cares about such things in the UP world, and trust me, many don't. Unless you think I'm merely a numbers cruncher or a money changer in the temple, I will quickly tell you that my most formative experience engaging with books was as a child and young adult, and that's still what informs me today. For whatever reason, the book as object, the book as consumer fetish, the book as educator, the book as entertainer has always been the central organizing theme of my life, starting from the moment I could read. That is to say, my primary perspective of the book, even as much as I know about it now, is always as a consumer of content. I believe a good story, a good idea, a good book, a good piece of knowledge will out. It will triumph. Since taking over Iowa, I've become an administrator, editorial director, expert on copyright and other contractual matters, a digital publisher, a CFO, a distribution expert, a semi-public face, along with my traditional sales and marketing roles. It's easy to lose sight of mission when you do that much, and when you work in scholarly publishing, it is a time of slings and arrows, the questioning how things are done and why, and often, sadly, the most pressing question of how can we afford to do this? Can we put a price on knowledge and scholarship? And what happened to the knowledge for knowledge's sake? Because that approach is really never just about knowledge's sake, is it? I worked in scholarly publishing for close to 20 years, and I've carried away two important lessons. One, as you can tell, I wear many different hats. And that, so my first experience is that a book is many different things to many different people. It is a person's life work, it's a person's passion, it's a reader's, it's an educator's tool, it is a reader's didactic piece of information. It can trigger further desire and search for more knowledge in a unique way that no other media can. Along the way, it also represents editorial and design puzzles to be solved, an object to be created, and a dollar to put away so that we can sustain future publishing ventures. And I think I'm just touching on a few. The concurrent thing I've carried away is that scholarly presses know precious little about their institutional individual constituents, particularly on the scholarly side. Let me clarify what I mean. We often understand what needs to be published. I think as we move into the electronic world, we're struggling with how to publish it. As we go along this electronic trail, we no longer talk about issues of cloth and paper. We're talking about data chunking and aggregators and issues of fair use and metadata and licensing and page downloads and STLs and BUPOs and SUPOs and PDFs and PCR files and EPUB replayable files. It's gotten complicated. We need to know that what works, what doesn't work, how scholars are accessing things, what they're looking at, what the students are looking at. There's a school of thought which finds voice in the Chronicle Higher Ed much too often, I think, and other outlets. The UPs are doomed or antiquated. As you can just tell from the list I rattled off, we're not. We're dealing with these issues. But we're working in a bit of a vacuum. And what we don't have is the ability that I think McGraw-Hill and some other educators are leading the way with, is to do market research. And so we're really stretched to find out how you, as the end user and as the intermediary of books, are using them. So I really want to encourage all faculty, all teachers, all librarians to interact with your press and interact with your library about how these things are being used. I've learned many things today. I don't work per se in the textbook market, but we do develop supplementary text. And it is interesting to see how people interact and how your vision of using these texts is. To that end, I will say that so far, the e-book phenomenon, if you want to call it that, is vendor driven. It's not end user driven, and it certainly hasn't been publisher driven. It's been created by people like Amazon. When they showed me that first Kindle in 2000, whatever it was, 6 or 5, said, we believe we can create a market around this. That means they may not be giving what you need to you. Now is the time when the digital ebooks are still in their infancy to have some feedback, to have some agency, to help create. And I think you can do that a lot through scholarly presses. So I'll wrap it up there and hand it off to Tim.
I have a brief PowerPoint here. Can you hear me okay? I'd like to just show you a few slides associated with this resonance. I consider it a resonance between print and screen reading. It's not really A versus B. We're right in the middle of that resonance, and I'd like to take just a couple minutes to talk about delivery devices, okay? Hardware. Let's see. Why is it that this tool, this device, has been so persistent for 1,600 years? This thing is like, to human society and culture, like the wheel is to getting things from point A to point B. It's gone through very few, if any, changes. So I think it's very important that all of us understand what features of this thing are so salient and why we interact with it so effectively as human beings. For instance, just to name a few things, the two covers protect what's inside. The covers provide a degree of reading privacy. The two-page display allows you to display type opposite image opposite images. These things are all important. Then why do these things look so different? It makes me concerned that the people who are inventing these objects, these pieces of hardware, really haven't had too much background in the original Codex book. Now, someone might say, well, yeah, Tim, you can buy a aftermarket leather cover that gives you that reading privacy, it protects what's inside. But that's just my point. This is aftermarket, right? This hasn't been part of the design process. Something is amiss here. So I recently had the physics and astronomy machine shop here work up this little prototype that's down in front. And I want you to imagine we're 10 years down the line. This is a e-book of the future. It recognizes your voice. Little lights come up on the outside that tell you that you have a text message or a tweet, and it will play them back to you. It has two covers that protects what's inside. You open it up and you can read Huckleberry Finn if you want to. Or, represented by these pieces of paper, it has full interactivity with the internet, a keyboard maybe that's holographically projected. It's portable, it's small, it's powered by the ambient light in the room or the heat from your body. And it provides a degree of reading privacy. Well, okay, so is that it? What about the fact that in a traditional book, we can read in several places at the same time? Peter Stahlgras, professor of history at Penn, has now some 37 historical painting, drawing, woodcut images of scholars reading books with their fingers or bookmarks in different places in the book at the same time. There's a we are in a space. Books are physical spaces that we walk through. We remember where we were. We try to get back to that same place, partly because of this physical attribute of the traditional book. So in designing something new, maybe it's a good idea not necessarily to leap forward, but to go backwards a bit. The Roman wax tablet has several sections to it, and we can imagine that they were used for a grocery list, the math problems we needed to talk to our child about that night, letters that we want to write to relatives. these structures have been there for a while, and they're telling us something about why these earlier devices work. So David Levy at the University of Washington and author of Scrolling Forward has suggested that this device, interesting, Tim, he said, but maybe there should be 3 or 4 wafer-thin pages that each can be used to represent a different section of the book. One can be the internet, one can be your text transmissions, the other can be audio-visual communications. My point here is that this device has attributes that not even those of us who are real book specialists fully appreciate. It's a good idea to pay special attention to this structure as we move ahead into the future. I'd just like to end by suggesting that maybe we have the potential here at this campus, in the middle of all this flux and craziness, to have a sort of mini Xerox park or a think tank that can design a truly user-friendly ebook of the future. That's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hillary Farmer, and I'm a digital learning consultant for McGraw-Hill Education. And this is a very interesting, challenging, fun time in a company that has traditionally been a publishing company. And we really see ourselves now as a technology company. And we still have textbooks, we still have authors, but our focus is creating content and giving students that content in ways that are engaging to them. And thinking of the book is dead and just, the theme for this symposium today, we have been working on something called Smart Book, which creates an individualized reading experience for students. And I've been in this industry for 8 years, and ebooks are typically seen as PDFs, and they're pretty boring, and it's hard to read on your screen, let alone even if you have an iPad. But what we have been trying to do is to engage students, get them into the content, and give them exactly what they need at that point in time. And I think, listening to everyone on this panel, we all know that the content is important, and it's fun to see, how, this will be changing throughout the years.
Thank you very much. I have a ton of questions, but you know what? I'm going to defer because I have a feeling that out there are also a lot of questions. So who would like to ask a question of the panel? Okay. Oh, Mark, do you have something? Or are you scratching your ear?
No, I should
just bid on it.
I should know. Find out a phrase that says a question. The conference is making me just think about the ways in which we have read and are reading now, and will be reading because of the influence of technology. The comment made today about linear and non-linear, using electronic means, but what I thought was resonant. In the sense you can see it the way people write as well. The internet is changing our train of thinking, which is becoming interrupted, and we use books much more for references rather than passages and so on. So I was just thinking, is it wrong to think of the book as the book, of the reading experience as the reading experience? Maybe there's a variety of them, and that the technology is bringing out the differences in the ways in which we read and use these items that have content to them. Maybe we could address that and talking about this rather than a military answer.
Well, while I was listening to the presentations today, which were really engaging, I had this sort of historical metaphor in mind. My bedtime reading right now is a book by William Dalrymple called The White Mughals, and it's about cultural interchange between Europeans and India. And I mentioned tipping points earlier, but I think it's reasonable to think that to ask how much agency we have in the internet age. And thinking about Dalrymple's early discussion about what happened to Europeans, the Portuguese, Italians, Germans, French, English, when they sailed over toward India and were boarded by pirates. Some of them who started out as Christians and working for European shipping companies, what would become in the British case the East India Company, changed religions. Some of them, in order to do that, were circumcised as adults. So there's a serious commitment there. But in this analog to the digital age, they recognized that there were rewards that they couldn't quite predict in the Mughal Empire that exceeded the wealth of the European places they were from. And I think that's a pretty good metaphor for what we're thinking about now. I mean, as a textbook author, I've done the next right thing, but I don't have a vision to the completion of it. And I think most of the time when we describe futurism is risky, but you know, I can tell you where I've been. So maybe that's a way to think about it.
Yeah, I would just say as I led my discussion with the comment about I'm not so worried about the book, I'm more worried about reading. But even as I said, the book as a unit is adaptable. I mean, we're commodifying that right now in publishing. We're selling chunks and bits and content. We're seeing particularly scholarly work being broken down by the page. And I predict, you know, and this is nothing new, I don't need to predict it, it will soon be sold by the sentence. Whether or not that will be profitable for anyone, I doubt, but that's what's going to happen. And so that's what I mean about books being durable. I think they will be appropriate to our needs, but I do think there's a real danger in that, in the sense that we do have this tradition of communication, at least in one essence, that is a long-form tradition. And I think there's a real danger to breaking that down into chunks. I think you really risk missing the forest for the trees, for lack of a better metaphor. But you know, I see this all the time when I speak, and then I go back and reread the tweets. Inevitably, and this could be my, you know, discursive style, but inevitably, what's getting tweeted is not my point. It might be a turn of the phrase or something that surprises people, but it's not the broader point. But yet that goes out into the world. And so I'm very cognizant of that's how we read information as well. And there is room for however we want to treat it, but I think it has to come with the caveat that we need to develop all the skills that we traditionally had along with the new ones.
Yeah, the only thing that comes to mind, we were talking about this at our table earlier today. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, there were a bunch of people in a room in togas listening to someone recite a poem out loud. And someone in the back of the room had a piece of papyrus and a pen, and he was starting to write it down. And everybody else in the room said, "What are you doing? You can't write this down. It has to be sung, or it has to be spoken out loud for it to be alive." And now we're at a weird flip-flop where the poem, if you will, can be transmitted to you in the form of the original poet's live reading. Or so we're into a range of media that allow creative output to not necessarily be literature, not necessarily text. And I guess we have to have a certain faith that brilliant, creative human work will be done using all of these media. And I don't know where that leads for the publishing, but it's a pretty exciting, scary time.
What comes to mind to me is when I'm working with professors, we've done quite a few student focus groups. And oftentimes we'll have professors send, you know, their best, their middle students, whoever will come for free food, frankly. What we find though is you'll often have, you know, two students that read the text, and they look at the beginning, and then they read through, and they process everything, and they understand it, and they're A students. More often than not, the majority, you know, they are going through life looking at information in chunks and trying to figure out what they need to know and then going to the text like that. And more often than not, they're not doing very well because they're not getting the whole reading experience. And I think for us, what our focus is working with students on an individual level and through technology to lead them through the text and the individual experience so they get the information that they need at the most important time for them. And, you know, oftentimes when they just have the traditional text, they don't know what to do with it, especially if you're at a, you know, a lower level school, lower level student. So I definitely think the reading experience is something that's important, but I also think it kind of needs to be taught to them. Just with what they're used to.
Yeah, just to rip on that for a second, that brings up some good points. But I think that poor students have always been poor students, and I know that because I was a poor student. And if they're not engaged with the text, they're going to hunt around. I mean, that's no different than it's ever been. I mean, but the question is, are we facilitating that now? Or do we have an opportunity to re-engage them through technology? And I think it's up to us to figure out the best ways to do that.
Another question? Yeah, maybe.
I heard something you said that it's driven by the vendors. It was driven by the vendors, but not by the end users. So 20 years from now, what would you predict? Is the force going to be dying or is it getting stronger? Or how do you turn around and hold make a mingle something to work with in a good balance?
Well, I think the larger issue is McGraw-Hill now views themselves as a technology company, which I'm not taking numbers with. I'm just saying, but technology companies have different agendas than, say, publishers. So if we take another technology company like Google, you know, are there end means, are end means. And so when we let them dictate the process of how we're going to read, I mean, we're really reliant on what kind of bells and whistles they feel great. And they might be perfectly in line what we as human beings need. But they might just be what we as human beings can do. I'll go back to the PDF thing that Heather brought up. Libraries are still, at least they're vendors, and I assume that libraries therefore are, really depend on PDFs. This is such an outdated mode of technology. You know, that's not what Amazon's using or B&N. I mean, they're using reflowable text files, you know, that can be read on your mobile device and have a lot more adaptability. I mean, there are benefits to PDF, but basically it started as a library ebook in 1996 or whatever, maybe before, I don't know. So libraries have gone from being ahead of the curve to kind of being behind it. But I don't think that's the library's fault, nor do I think it's the publisher's fault. I think it's the intermediary's fault. We don't have the money to develop technology. I mean, we barely have the money to publish books and to add on the electronic component. So and the libraries are in the same boat, but we're in, you know, in servitude to this middle vendor. So in ebooks parlance, that would be the aggregator. They're the ones coming to us saying, we want a PDF. And we're saying, well, wait a minute, we have this more adaptable file. But their platforms work with the PDF, so that's what they want. You know, until they decide to invest in new technology or whatever the holdup is. We're just, you know, the crux is we just don't have the money, and the technology side has the money but might not have the interest of the end user. So it's a real dilemma. I mean, it's a real dialectic that we need to work through.
You know, I think one of the anxieties that we're kind of experiencing collectively is about the social friend, sort of Goffman's notion of meeting each other at some common time and common place. And if our students don't know the way we know, and they don't know what we know the way we know have known it, that's anxious making for those of us who've been invested in a particular technology, a traditional book. But for me, that comes under the heading of pedagogy. And so we moved from a readings packet to an e-text, and then the e-text to the tile classroom, which in itself, which is a technology-oriented, much like this room, work table sort of arranged, computer-equipped room, which is geared principally to turning the lights on every student in the room and making sure that everyone has some reason to be engaged in the analysis of and the discussion of a particular object related to concepts that are in a text, or otherwise, and that we're all in the same place at the same time. So it's a really old-fashioned kind of outcome for a very tech-driven situation. And so I think I'm saying that I come to the digital question from a different perspective, which is that it has to suit the needs I have in the classroom. And it's possible to do those things without a digital format, but it's enhanced in that way.
Make it a real quick one.
So in the Phaedrus, Plato talks about the fact that if we all adopt writing, it will destroy our memories and we will be unable to continue with the dialectic. And then I just am imagining somebody observing the early Christians adopt the codex against the scroll, and saying, well, look at this codex. You can open up in every page, and you can go back, and go forwards, and this is terrible. It's destroying the linearity of the text. And then in about 1490, somebody saying, look at these books. They're all exactly the same. They've been reproduced by a machine. This sucks. I just keep it. It's like radio is going to ruin our minds, and then comic books are going to make everybody into juvenile delinquents, and then if you allow people to tape records, the music industry is going to destroy. I mean, how much of this anxiety is just really predictable because we're getting old?
And for those of us who are old, it's pretty accurate.
Except for you. But seriously, I'm just trying to think of it. Can we really chart differences in the way that human beings think and process information as the technology has changed over the last 25 years? And if we can't, what does it do to our ability to predict what's going to happen over the next 20?
That's about one page go.
I think you're really right. I mean, there may be nothing new at all going on right now, but it's still scary.
Well, I have it in for Plato because he hated the rhetoricians.
Well, and I think that's a good point that, everything is changing so quickly, and, no one really knows the right way to do this. But it's, working with the end users and figuring out what's the best for students.
Thank you very much. I think you guys brought up some really interesting points that hadn't been touched upon, at least in the whole group. So I really appreciate this. And I have a feeling all of them will be accessible if you have other questions to ask them. So thank you very much. And Steve's going to just say a couple of quick things.
Yes, two quick things. Thank you all for coming. Have a great semester. And you will be getting an email with a survey. Please take a few minutes to fill that out. We're going to ask you how you thought this went, and then also ask for suggestions about next year, because we couldn't do it without you guys. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the rank.
Because you need page numbers for citation, that's by PDF. Yeah. It all goes back to the scholars.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of it I would say is, because I don't have an e-reader,
Yes,
so I'm
yep, I just
looking
have
on
to
my
get it for all that,
laptop,
yeah.
it's all been